this is my annotations for the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks. So the first thing that I highlighted or underlined was the segregated hospital and how that was really important to the beginning of the story because it took them about 20 miles to get to the nearest hospital. And even though it was considered an emergency, it still took forever for them to get there because of the segregation between whites and blacks. And the next thing was when Henrietta talks about going to visit the Jesus statue and her little ritual there, and how the superstition and religious aspects of that were very important, and how she didn't stop that day, and how that could be seen as going against her superstitious belief. The next was when she talks about the rapid growing tumor that either the doctors had missed or was just growing really fast. This was important because the tumor was the main problem or argument brought up in the story. The removing of the cells is illegal now, but when Henrietta first went to the hospital, it was completely okay in the doctor's minds to take the cells without her consent. This brings up a lot of issues later on throughout the story because without consent from the patient, the family figured that it shouldn't happen, but it did, and it brings up problems even 20, 30 years down the road with Henrietta's daughter, Deborah, as she wants to learn more about her mother but can't because of these issues. The chipped toenails was another big thing that was mentioned in the story. It wasn't a huge part of the story, but it was big enough for me to highlight it because it just shows how Henrietta really let herself go when the cancer started to spread throughout her body, and how it just shows her personality on how she was always neatly put together, but towards the end she wasn't. When talking about her cells, they bring up her race and how she was a colored woman, and that many believe that this was the reason why they didn't ask to take her cells, because they didn't think that she, as a African American woman, should have the right to decide what happens to her cells. Many also dispute her cells because she is a colored woman, and they think, wow, that's bad because she's colored and she's not white, which also shows the racist aspect of this book and of that time. Social class segregation was another big thing brought up when talking about how important Henrietta was to science, and how they still can't afford health insurance all these years later. It was a big part of the novel, and how the mom, Henrietta, was deemed important and yet not important enough for them to have good health insurance. There was a lot of miscommunication throughout the novel, especially when talking about the cells, whether the doctor should have communicated with Henrietta about taking the cells, and just about how everything was handled. That's why Henrietta's son was convinced that they stole his mother's cells and were selling them to make millions. Now, that wasn't necessarily true, but they did take Henrietta's cells without asking. They didn't necessarily sell them, but they were distributed among the scientific community for research. New laws were made way after Henrietta's whole issue. Now, taking and publishing medical records like they did with Henrietta is illegal and very frowned upon in today's community. The family were not exempt from the division of how the cells should have been handled, and Henrietta's son says that they should have wanted money for the scientists taking the cells, and that they should have, sued, but Deborah wanted everybody to just be able to learn from what her mother had, and, help science overall. A Hopkins doctor now says that what happened to Henrietta was not okay, and that she was taken advantage of, basically. And this caught Deborah off guard because, she didn't think that a Hopkins doctor, no less, would feel this way about the cells and how the whole situation went down with her mother. The whole family dislikes what happened with Henrietta's body and how they stole her cells in their eyes and used them. But, it comes down to perspective, which was also brought up a lot in the book, of how the doctors seemed to be important enough to steal her cells and use them to further advance medicine, but it was argued that they should have talked to the family beforehand. And that's it.